Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Board's Finance Committee. Be reminded of the structure of the Board Committee meetings. We'll have a presentation followed by board discussion, and upon completion of the board discussion, any citizens in attendance will have an opportunity for comment. The Chair now recognizes Steve Morbey, Chairperson of Finance Committee, to call the meeting to order.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Chair of the Finance Committee, I call this meeting of the whole for the Finance Committee to be open today. And I think we then will move forward into Ms. Vicki Bending, who might have a presentation or an agenda prepared for us. Mrs. Bending.
Thank you, Mr. Morbey. So for this evening, for the Finance Committee meeting, we will be following the agenda. We're going to have David Satana, who's with us via Zoom, who will present the 2020-2021 financial statements. That'll be the first part of the meeting, and then the second part of the meeting will go over the state of the budget, and we'll talk about the resolution that you may have seen that is going to appear on the agenda. So without further ado, Dave, if you want to take it away.
Okay, you want to tell him to pause?
Hold on one second, Dave.
Get him on speakers.
Matt, can you get him to come through the speaker on the Epson?
I don't think it'll go through the adapter.
Try.
No, we're going to have to hook up an external speaker so that they can hear you, because it's just coming through my computer. So if you hold on one second, I'm sorry. Dave, can you go try now? Okay, try it now, Dave. Please pause for some time.
Oh, my very first one.
That's better.
All right.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can everyone see the graph analysis on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is really kind of the highlights of the 2020-21 audit. The actual audit itself is this big document, and it's roughly as long. And so obviously it's very comprehensive. There's a lot of information. And throughout the graph analysis, you'll see references to page numbers. So if there's any pages throughout the graph analysis that kind of piques your interest, you know, if you see a page number, you can go to the big document in detail behind the actual reports or any of the actual graph analysis. There's really 3 reports included in your financial statements. When I say your financial statements, actually that 60-page document is the district's. And within that document are a whole lot of numbers and actually a whole lot of disclosures that correspond and correlate to the numbers. And our job is to ultimately provide an opinion to the district as to whether or not the numbers and the disclosures are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And pleased to report, this is what's referred to as an unmodified, clean audit opinion with no exceptions. And that's the highest level of assurance that we can provide as an audit firm. So you're always striving to see that as your first page. So congratulations on a clean, unmodified, independent auditor's report. The next two documents or reports are actually, you'll see they're further on in the audit document. They're more back, but they're still an integral part of the district audit. And both of them, this page and then when I look at the next page, you'll see words like internal controls and compliance. Okay. What's the difference between the two reports? The first report is just a general overall internal controls and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. Basically, the crux of this report is saying, during the course of the audit, if there are any items that come to our attention that we consider to be a weakness in controls or something that didn't comply with the laws and regulations, we're required to actually report that in this section of the document. And, the emphasis of the audit in our responsibility is actually, we're not doing like a forensic or an internal control specific audit. It's a financial audit. However, during the course of the work that we do, if there are any instances where we see there's a weakness or an area of non-compliance, we're required again to report that. We have one item that we consider to be a weakness in controls, and it's labeled adjusting journal entries, disclosures, financial statement preparation. It's found on page 56 of the audit report, and basically the gist of this is that we play a role in helping the district get your financial statements in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So we play a role in making some adjusting journal entries that are required at your end to kind of bring some of your balances to maybe the accrual method or the full accrual method. And then we also assist in the disclosures of that big document as well. Okay, so, this is a comment that's pretty common among school districts and nonprofits and smaller entities. It's a comment that we've made in the past, and more than likely it's a comment that we'll continue to make in the future. For those members that were on the board last year, and I think the year before, we also had a material weakness in the area of payroll, particularly the segregation of duties over payroll. And you'll notice that comment was removed in the 2020-21 year. And we did a lot of, discussions with Vicki and looked at documents on some of the things that have been implemented to address the comment that was in the report in prior years, and ultimately made the determination that comment was addressed. Some of the items that have been put in place to address that comment is number one, adjusting journal entries. The district has a process whereby the preparation and the review of journal entries is documented, and there's a procedures in place on how that all this is intended to work. The bank reconciliation process, which is a big one. You've always done bank reconciliations. The enhancement now is that Vicki, who reviews the bank recs, is documenting the review of the canceled checks and the activity, any wires that go through the bank. statements during the course of the month. That's being well documented on those bank statements on a monthly basis. You've implemented a payroll review where Sue in the business office now monthly randomly picks 5 employees of the district and actually takes the pay for that particular period and looks at documentation to support that individual was paid the correct payment based on their contract. And then most recently, you've put in what's called positive pay through your bank, whereby all the transactions that the district makes gets provided to your financial institution, who actually doesn't release payment until there's a matchup on what the check says compared to what the district provided the financial institution. So there's a more or less a double check or a reconciliation that the bank's doing for every single disbursement that's being generated by the district. So, there's some really good things that have been put in place. The only item that we have continued to report on that we put in the management letter, so we didn't couch it as a finding, was in the area of your payroll withholdings, which is like a liability account. And what we're basically suggesting is that the district really kind of put more of a formalized process in place whereby those withholding accounts are being reviewed on a monthly basis. I think based on discussions with Vicki, like informally you're doing some sort of review, and certainly at year end a review is performed, and we're just kind of saying, put something a little more formalized and documented that step is also being in place. Okay. Any questions with regards to that? Because I know that was obviously a big item, and I just would open it up if anybody has any further questions that they would like answered.
I have 2 questions. The first one on letter A, you said that you reported it in the past and you'll probably report it again in the future. What are the mitigating steps to not have that on as a report item?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably the biggest mitigating one would be for the journal entries that we assist with, that they would really be mostly prepared by the district rather than by us. Now that's a tough one because, not only do we assist in some journal entries that are in like your general fund and your capital cafeteria, but more essentially are the long-term assets and liabilities that I'm going to cover here in a little bit. And the challenge with those are, a lot of the accounting for that is something that really you report once a year on your financial statements. And, we do 40 to 50 audits of school districts, so, we're accustomed to making those journal entries and transactions. And a lot of school districts, they rely on their audit firm to help them prepare that. So, it's kind of overall a consensus of whether or not, all those types of things are being completed, that we would make a determination of whether or not that could be removed or not.
And if I could just add, like he said, there are many school districts that have the same exact finding that's reported on their financial statement. It would take me going to a lot of training and schooling to be able to know and be removed from day-to-day operations of the school district in order to be able to know what adjusting journal entries and how to prepare the financial statements. So because the auditing firm does that for us, we pay them to do the financial statements for us. It's a good process to have someone from the outside looking in at your books and making sure that everything balances and matches. So outside of that, this finding will, or statement will not go away.
I have a question on that topic. I know you have another one.
Well, I just wanted to comment on this.
Okay.
And that's good information, and I think that's a risk or issue that we would agree to be okay with. But if that is the process by which we handle these things, why would it even be a finding? Why would it even be a matter on the report? I mean, that it's just the way we do things, and other districts do the same, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we get that question a lot. And, you know, I think ultimately when part of this process and evaluation related to the adjusting journal entries and disclosures, it's not, you know, specifically related to schools. It's related to every single audit throughout the country, big or small. And so, you know, an example might be like a Fortune 500 company that is publicly reporting their financial information on a quarterly basis. And once a year they have an audit, and there's adjustments that have to be made to, you know, get their numbers into form that's in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. It's alerting the reader or the user to say, you know, this assistance was needed, there were journal entries that had to be reported. And so, you know, if I'm utilizing information like this for quarterly reports, I should just have that in my mind. You're really only reporting once a year, but again, the standard and the comment really applies to everyone. So it's a tough one. It really is. It's difficult in some ways to kind of comprehend, but you know, that's kind of our interpretation of it.
Okay, so it's low risk. It's just going to be on the report. We agree that it's okay.
And it's,
Yeah.
it's a finding, it's an observation, it's not anything punishment or bad.
Right.
So it's more of just by the way, this is what we do and we know it here in this type of a finding.
Yeah, it's really, it's full disclosures.
Yeah, we have to
Right.
disclose it, and then we're doing this. Yeah. Got it.
Any other questions? Anybody else have any other questions? Well, thank you. This will be item F5 on our agenda for next week, well, later tonight and next week. So,
Dave, you can go ahead. They were finished with questions on that part.
Okay, wonderful.
You might want to remind them what the time.
And you have about 12 minutes.
Okay, wonderful. The next report, again, in compliance internal controls, difference is this is actually related to the federal dollars that the district received. And the difference with this is actually we are providing an opinion as to whether or not the district complied with federal laws and regulations with respect to programs that we tested that are federal in nature. And this year we tested 2 programs that actually totaled over $1,600,000. And that's some of the new CARES, ESSER funding that the district received and spent money on. And then secondly was in the cafeteria, we received federal reimbursement for the meals that we received, that we provided to the children. And so a lot of our audit is geared towards testing whether you complied with the laws and regulations. Some of it obviously is financial, and some of it is more programmatic, like reporting type things that we're required to review. And I'm pleased to report that we had no findings with respect to the district's federal dollars, either in the area of compliance or internal controls. In total, the district had $2.7 million in federal awards, and that could be the most federal dollars that the district has ever received. And that number could actually go up in the future because of some of the additional stimulus funding that the district has received as a result of the pandemic. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through just some of the numbers, highlights, big picture very quickly. The first two pages are, which we refer to as the GASB 34. Really, this is the pronouncement that requires school districts to report long-term, not just short-term model. And you'll see we present the assets, liabilities, and net position. Biggest takeaway real quickly for the board is your total net position long-term is negative. And the reason for that is because included in our liabilities is a pretty significant liability called net pension liability. It is the retirement system, the PSER system that we're in currently is unfunded. And so every district throughout the state shares in that unfunded liability and has to report that within your financial statements. That totaled $32 million at the end of June 30th, 2021. And again, that's really the big driver of why this is negative. The positive is that each year over the last 4 years, you can see there's been steady improvement over our net position overall, which means we've been able to have a positive district-wide long-term operational surplus. Basically improved our long-term finances in that period of time. You'll notice expenditures, again, district-wide, long-term basis, almost identical this year versus last year. Our general revenue, which is mostly property taxes and our basic state was pretty flat. And really the only change this year versus last year was program revenue, which again was in the way of federal dollars that were related to the pandemic. Okay, we'll see that when we cover the general fund here in a little bit. General fund, so this is the fund annually when the district Board of Education approves a budget, you're approving the general fund. This is the main operation of the district. And you can see in the current year, there was a little bit of a gain as far as our assets. Our liabilities were up as well, but the impact was we had a little bit of an increase in our total equity. Our assets were up because of cash. Part of that cash was, again, positive operations. Part of that cash increase was just timing. You had transfers to your capital project fund that were made through June 30th, but the cash just hadn't transferred yet. So it was out due to the capital project. Had this transfer been made by June 30th, your cash level in the general fund would have been up, but wouldn't have been up as significantly. The net impact, again, our equity total was up $1,000. Most significantly, we had an increase in committed fund balance, and the fund balance that the board has set aside for future capital projects. And it increased during the course of the year. And then our unassigned fund balance down a little bit from revenue. And this was pretty consistent. I mean, this was a pretty nice year from an increase in revenue standpoint for a lot of school districts. Probably not just in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country. Year revenue was actually up about. And again, the big driver of the increase this year was ESSER 1 and the ESSER 2 funding that the district received through June 30th, 2021. There's still funding related to ESSER 2 that'll happen probably during this year that we're in. And then there's funding that's over $2 million related to ESSER 3 or the American expenditures were actually down in the general fund, and that's a little deceiving because really a big part of the decrease was just the transfers that included in this transfers are twofold. Number one, we make transfers to the debt service fund to pay our expenditures, about $2.5 million. The other transfers, particularly the last 3 years, relate to transfers to the project fund. And in the last 2 years, you've done projects for project and also your athletic facility. And then the prior year, you also had some work at the middle school. And again, these are transfers that go over to the capital project to help pay for those expenditures. If you take out the change in the transfers, total expenditures were up about $500,000, just under 2% this year versus last year. One of the big takeaways, I think a lot of schools had differences as far as like their costs related to tuition, particularly cyber tuition. And actually, Wattsburg area school district's cyber tuition was very comparable in 21 versus 20. And again, an increase of about just under $50,000, where some school districts that was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So overall, your tuition that you paid out to other districts was very comparable in 21 versus 20. So very, the last slide in the general fund is a really nice chart. The revenue is in the blue, expenditures is in the red. And you can see if there's a gap, that means you had a little bit of a surplus. If the gap is the red above the blue, you had a little bit of a deficit. Really, these 3 years, the last 3 are, they've been touched by transfers that we make to the capital project fund. So in 2019, you had a transfer of about $1 million to the capital. 2020, you transferred $3.3 million. And in 2021, you transferred about $1.5 million to the capital. So if you were to pull those transfers out and say, well, operationally, how did we do in the general fund over that 5-year period? Actually, your blue versus the red the gap would be pretty consistent. It would range from about $1 million in 2017, and then this current year, without the transfer, was just a little over $2 million. And then every year between was somewhere in the middle between those two. Okay, so pretty, narrow margin between the 5 years, pretty consistent if you don't include those transfers. Okay. The next section of the audit, which I'm not going to cover real detail, but it's your food service fund, and the biggest takeaways is you had a banner year in the cafeteria. Your assets and your equity was up tremendously, and your revenue was up tremendously prior year. Expenditures were up too, but the net impact is you had a pretty significant surplus in the cafeteria to the top. Why did that occur? Really twofold. One, you served a lot more meals in 2021 versus 2020. You served approximately 150,000 lunches compared to 110,000 the prior year, and your breakfast actually went from 50,000 in 20 to about 120,000 in 21. Okay, so that had a significant impact, obviously, on the level of revenue and expenditures. But because of the pandemic, the federal government is now reimbursing school districts 100% for every meal that's served to the students. And they're reimbursing that at the free rate. And so your price per meal that you're receiving in 2021 for a lunch was about $3.50, whereas in the prior year, the average price per meal was closer to about $2.25. So each and every meal that the district served, you're actually obtaining a higher reimbursement than you have in prior years, which really resulted in this significant positive year in 2021. You're not alone. A lot of school districts had very good years in the cafeteria. Is due to the program that's currently in place due to the pandemic. And that program is actually continuing in the 2021-22 year. Okay? So a lot of school districts are reviewing, their needs in the capital projects with respect to equipment and functionality, and really looking at things that could potentially be improved while we know operations are so positive. And just in closing, the very last page of the audit is what we refer to as the management letter. We talked a little bit about the payroll withholding liability account policy. The other couple comments are kind of housekeeping. Some of these comments we've made in the prior year. Just wanted to touch upon the last one, GASB 7. That's a new accounting standard that'll be in place next year with regard to leases, and it'll require school districts to account for their leases a little bit differently than they have in the past, if they're considered to be material. And so we'll help Vicki evaluate, the leases that the district currently has and determine, whether this GASB will come into play for 2021-22. And that's it. So, just in closing, I just would like to thank everyone at the district, obviously Vicki and her team. I think, it was great that we were able to, remove the finding with regards to the payroll for this current audit. And again, I think as far as the numbers are concerned, you had a real solid financial year, not only in the general fund, but also the cafeteria. So, well done. And hopefully 2021-22 bodes well as well.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Spending, you want to move on?
Sure. So Dave, I think that's all that we have for you. We're going to move on with the rest of our financial committee meeting. So if you want to pop off, that's super. And I have the preliminary reports if the board wants to see them or look at them. I know that they were sent out prior to this week so that they weren't going to have a chance to look at it. So thank you, Dave.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so moving on to the budget highlights for the last part of the Finance Committee meeting. We're going to talk about the Act 1 index and tax revenue projections, just for those of you that haven't been through the budgeting process before. So we have a little bit of education that's built in. Becca, could you please share or bring up the budget highlights, executive summary, please? Not the financial statements. There we go. Okay, good. So just so you know, this is kind of where I start with when we were talking about the budget. If we talk about the Act 1 index, I know that it was mentioned in the weekly update that if we wanted to seek exceptions beyond an Act 1 index increase, we had to make a preliminary budget open for public inspection for 10 days, and that would have to happen in January. And it is our recommendation that, well, first of all, I did the calculations. We do not qualify for any exceptions. So there's no reason for us to have a preliminary budget that says we need to go above the index because we're not eligible to go above the index anyway. So where I start is as I take the budget amount from 21-22, which is this year, and then I go through and say, okay, how much more revenue can we get? So we make some assumptions. We assume that we're going to have all of our same programming either at the same level or moving up from what we have. We assume that we are not going to get any additional basic ed subsidy or federal programming for transportation or special ed reimbursement. We assume that we're going to still have the Ready to Learn educational block grant. And for this purpose only, I assume that we're going to go to an Act 1 index increase in property taxes. It doesn't mean that I'm recommending that. I'm just using it as a pictorial explanation so that you guys have an idea of what that is. So an Act 1 4.6% tax increase, which 4.6 is our adjusted allowable rate, it will increase our revenues about $536,000, $536,000. That is if property values remain exactly as they are today, or as they were at the beginning, as of last year when taxes were issued. Typically, property values increase, or people are building or have additions, and then there are property tax increases over the year, and the total assessment of of our district goes up about $2 million every year. So, and we'll see that a little bit later too. But I assume that there's no increase. It's what it was last year. If we just add 4.6%, it's about $536,000. And then I go through and I adjust the expenditures based on what I know today. So I know that today our expenditure increases are the bond debt for the Erie County Technical School renovation. We just voted on that bond issue. It's going to be about $53,000 a year that's going to hit the budget. Salary increases from this year to next year, those are about $247,000. Medical insurance rates, they go up every year. This year it is bad. The increase, prior years it had been right around 2.5%. Last year our increase was 8.77%. This coming year it is now projected to have a 13% increase. So this is where I'm really worried about how are we going to pay for the insurance. It's an increase, an additional cost of about $386,000.
Yeah, and you can see we had been working for years to get it to the point where an Act 1 increase in taxes or a little less would cover our expected increases that we can't really control. Salaries is another example, but that kind of pales in comparison to the health insurance jump. And of course, we outsourced the bus drivers, and we have two unions remaining, the teachers union, and then everybody who's not a teacher or bus driver is in the local 2 union. And if you look at those contracts, the percent raise increases that we negotiated with them are right in line with the CPI, the cost price index, or in some cases with the teachers below it. And we've also increased their health deductibles considerably to try to deal with this problem. But yeah, I don't know what's causing that extreme of a jump this year, but it's an uncontrollable thing, and you can see it blew our balance up.
I will say that COVID has had a lot to do with it, only because there's so much focus on COVID coverage. There's been, there's members that have had to have intubation and spend a lot of time in the hospital. We do have stop loss insurance for insurance claims that go above a certain point. So we pay a premium to buy insurance to insure the extended costs over a certain amount. So if someone were to have cancer treatment or have to have an extended stay in the hospital, it doesn't come right out of our pocket. We pay for an insurance so that they pay that portion. But the insurance, we are self-insured, so we pay whatever claims come in. So this increase is because of our increased usage, and it is based on the same formula that they've been using for the last 15 years, where they do a three-year look back, and they look at the amount of your claims, and it's weighted based on your most current year And this 13% is what the projection is for right now. So this is really worst case scenario, I'm hoping. But moving on, the good news is that the PCERS employer rate for 2022.
I do have a quick question, if I can. So, on the insurance again, first you indicated that the unions and the agreements that we have with those unions, there's a health component, a health insurance component to that. So we're paying into those funds for their insurance portion, correct? Right, and so those are based upon the agreement, the contract agreements, et cetera, that we make. And so they have their own health insurance companies who then charge their members a certain amount, correct? Is that fair?
No, we
Is that not right?
actually, we're, and Vicky can explain it better, but we put all of our insurance goes through a trust fund,
Okay.
which involves a very large number of school districts.
Okay.
11 school districts in Erie County.
Yeah,
All right.
and with that amount of money, we've been able to build in stop loss insurance and
Fair enough.
really pool leverage.
And our
Okay.
insurance broker negotiates pricing with Highmark and UPMC, which we currently only offer Highmark insurance.
Right.
So they can say, the Norbit Trust goes to Highmark and says, we have 25,000 employees and families that we want you to insure. What's the best price that you, so they beat them up over pricing so
Okay.
that we get a better discount. If you have Highmark insurance, you get this discount. So
Sure.
the benefit is that we're getting the benefit from having that large
Pool.
quantities of scale to get the better price for insurance. But, so the employees pay $45, $50, I think it's $50, $55, or $60 a month for single husband, wife, or family insurance. And the portion that the district is paying is $650, $1,200, or $1,800.
Right.
So a month.
Right.
Per member.
Mhm.
So the deductibles are lower, and those are all contract negotiated things. So when employees in local 2 or teachers unions or administrators become employees, they're offered Highmark insurance. They're insured through the district. The district pays all of those bills.
Sure.
Less their monthly deductible
Their
copay.
own
So
employee contribution. But then you indicated that you said we were self-insured.
But
So I didn't
We are
understand.
self-insured. So Highmark manages our insurance. We pay that $1,800 a month per family coverage into the trust. So we have a pot of money that we put money in.
Is Wattsburg Area School District money?
It goes into the whole trust.
Okay.
So they keep track of Wattsburg Area School District has $12 million or $2 million. You know, Fort LaBeouf has $2 million. Iroquois has whatever they put in. Carver Creek has whatever they put in. So they keep track of, but it's all in one
Fair.
fund.
Right.
So then claims come in at the end of the month, and they say, okay, Wattsburg had $1,500 in claims, and Iroquois had $2 million worth of claims. So this month I might have $500,000 extra, and next month, after we make our $230,000 payment for the month, we might have $2 million worth of claims, which we might not have $2 million worth in our account, but they're gonna rob from other school districts. Like, we're just gonna show a negative, hoping that all the other school districts have a positive amount so that the trust can make the payment to pay for the claims.
Okay.
So it is beneficial for us to be a part of the trust because they have been able to keep our insurance costs low for a very long time. And the insurance increase in the private sector is at least double this. Like, the increases are almost uncontrollable.
So that,
But the employee contribution portion is a lot more. In many
Correct.
cases,
In
in the private sector.
private sector, yes.
So that somewhat balances out.
Yeah, so we've dealt with that at the bargaining table.
Yes.
We've tried to tackle it several different ways, and we went at the unions with, well, hey, but you have to contribute more. It's got to look more like the private sector. And they come back and go, well, wait a minute. You're in the trust. We know that you're not paying anything. Your increases aren't anything like the private sector. Plus, they say, we'll accept a CPI cost raise, in line with inflation at the minimum amount, but then, don't expect me to pay $1,000 because you're actually giving me a pay decrease. So the avenue that we went is tackling the deductibles. Like, I think everyone's deductibles are going to be up to $1,000 now. They will swallow that pill because it doesn't hit every person. It just hits the people that end up having to pay. So they'll take that on the chin, and that significantly lowers, what we have to pay if in premiums. So, it's a little different than the corporate world, but that's what we've done to date to try to manage it. It's difficult, though.
And as you indicated, that's all contractually obligated, so you can't just change that year over year.
Midstream, no, you can, right.
Whereas a lot of, it's every year is a renewal, every year is a potential, I don't want to call it bidding process, but where you go out and you look for the best price on your insurance company.
And
but we're unable to do that.
And we haven't been in a bargaining situation in a while, but we will in the next year or two start to get back into it. And you'll see that we can get anything at the bargaining table to spend, depending on how long you want to wait, and then what you're willing to do in terms of damage to morale. And so you have to balance all those things.
Nikki, you were indicating that this is projected, so I know we are, timeline out from needing to approve the overall budget, but when does that get locked in, our rate? And you're saying this is worst case scenario, you hope?
I'm hoping. So this is based on preliminary projections through the month of October claims, because that was in December, that was the most recent data that they had, plugging it into that 3-year formula and waiting this year and all of that. So we will meet again with him in, he will meet with each school district hopefully in January, and that'll have information through December, and I think that that's probably what they'll use to lock in the rate that's going to be projected for next year. Now, we could choose to say, well, we can't afford 13%. We could choose to say, well, we're only doing a 10% increase. But any surplus or reserve that we have in the trust to pay for should someone get some catastrophic, loss, or we have more employees that have to go to the stop loss insurance, so they're meeting the maximum amount of claims, we could be in the negative at the end of the year, which we then have to make up so that we're not in the negative going into the following year.
As a lump sum.
So if we choose to only do 10% this year and next year, the projection is 10%, we might have to go to 13% just to make up for what we decided not to fund this year.
So it does fluctuate up or down?
It can.
It's probably not likely.
So because it's weighted over a 3-year period, if you have a really, really bad year, that weighting is supposed to help lessen it. So should we get through the pandemic and we have, and everybody's healthy and nobody's having accidents, and you can't bet on someone not having an accident. Accidents happen, so, but yes, so it could be less. We could go back down to a 2% increase next year, and then we could be very excited about it. Okay, so I want to get through the rest of this, and I know we only have a little bit of time. So the PSERS rate for next year is only a slight increase. This year it's 34.94%. Next year it's going to 35.26%. So the estimation is about a $92,000 increase. Those who've been on the board for a couple of years know that there's been times where that estimation's been $250,000, almost $300,000 each year. So this is a good small change. We know that our transportation contract's gonna increase about $45,000, and we just got information that the Erie County Technical School is gonna have an increase of $57,000 in contribution. That is because we have increased enrollment, which is a good thing. We've got more kids going to the tech school and utilizing it, but they're giving their teachers a 3% raise. So when we send more kids, we have a bigger portion of the pie that we have to pay for. So our it's a good problem to have, but about $57,000. So if you add all of those together, it adds up to about 800. Becca, can you go back up to the top, please? Adds up to about $824,000. So we're going into this preliminary with a $287,000 deficit. But we will, over time, come up with ways to bridge that so that we can go to a Act 1 or less increase. So can you scroll down to so the next section is we're going to continue the curriculum material funding of $250,000 per year. That way our kids have the newest technology or books. The maintenance initiatives are about $177,000 each year. We've included in that a new maintenance truck to replace the 2007 salt truck that's kind of falling apart and rusting out. It includes the HVAC building controls agreement, about $92,000. $10,000 for waterproofing and repointing, and janitorial equipment replacement plan of $5,000 each year. So that's what's included for maintenance. Technology initiatives, we spend about $300,000 on our technology plan every year. That includes about $180,000 worth of district laptop leases. We have those on a rotation, so we never own a computer that's older than 3 years old, or we never are stuck with a 3-year-old computer that is now not worth anything. We rotate every year, so we just got K-8 new computers. I think the high school's next year, and then after that it's K-1, 2 again, and teachers. So we're working on that lease, and then additional technology needs, whatever we would decide to do as a technology plan, capital project, about $120,000 allocated to that. Our budgetary reserve right now is set at $1.25 million. It's $950,000 for charter school tuition and about $300,000 for our budgetary reserve operating contingencies. So things that come up through the year that we don't know that we're going to have to plan for, or we haven't built it into the budget, but it's still something that's best for our students.
That charter school, I mean, I can get on my high horse with that, but that is just growing out of control. The principals did a lot of visits this summer, and we did get quite a few students back, but it's a constant churn of people trying it out, because they might not want to try ours, or they've had enough with that school district, and I'm going to go try, PA Cyber, because they've told me that they're going to turn me into a pumpkin before midnight or whatever. So that's and to put it in perspective, back to 2013 when I was hired here, that was about a $300,000 a year bill. Plus, the state was reimbursing a portion of that cyber charter tuition, which they dropped. So this is just a constant drain on our resources.
So, and the last thing that I will mention is that an Act 1 real estate tax increase at our 4.6% max is an additional $94.67 per year on a tax bill for a home that's assessed at about $100,000. So the average home in Green Township is assessed at like $120,000. The average home in the other townships in our district are assessed between $80,000 and $95,000. That's their average. So they are a little bit less in other parts of our district than in Green Township. So I use this $100,000 as a blanket, so your house may be assessed at $12,000 twice that much or 2.5 times that much, you can multiply the 94.6 times that. Becca, can you bring up the Act 1 timeline? So this is the timeline that PDE requires us to follow. There are specific dates that we have to keep our eye on to make sure we don't miss a deadline. So the most pressing deadline is that as of January 27th, every school district in the state of Pennsylvania has to make a proposed version of the preliminary budget available for public inspection, or adopt a resolution pursuant to the Act 1 index indicating that it will not raise the tax of any tax by more than its index. So, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have an option to have any exceptions. So there's no reason for us to not adopt a resolution to not raise it more than the Act 1 index. Becca, could you really quick bring up the spreadsheet that I sent you?
Can you see that?
I cannot.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, reshare. Hold on 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect. And can you click on the exceptions tab at the bottom? So just so you know, I went through the process of the special ed funding. And so special ed expenditures, there's this calculation where you have to go from 2 years ago expenditures based on this year's expenditures and how much we received in funding from special ed, and then you subtract the two, and the allowable referendum exception is negative $167,000, which means we're not eligible because we have managed and maintained and kept in line our special ed expenditures based on the funding that we get. We're not eligible for an exception for that.
And the other big piece of the special ed cost containment is the IU used to have a lot of our classrooms here. We subcontracted to them, and their charges were starting to get pretty exorbitant. And we looked at it and said, we can do that in-house cheaper. So we brought all but one IU program back under our supervision, and they're using our employees now and aides. And in addition to that, we kind of have a gentleman's agreement with like Northeast, Iroquois, and Harbor Creek. We have programs that they don't have, and they have programs that we don't have. So we're actually pulling in quite a bit of tuition from those other 3 school districts for some of our life skills programs in particular.
And then the other portion is the retirement contributions. Because the retirement increase in the employer rate is becoming smaller each year, that plays into how much would be eligible that we would be able to apply for. And again, the allowable referendum exception is negative, so it's too close, it's too much, it's in the hole, we can't apply for any money. So that's pretty much where we're at, where the referendum is. We gotta stay within the index, and we gotta figure out how we can balance the budget based on an Act 1 index or less. And we'll talk about the projection and the historical tax increases next month at a finance committee. When I have some more solid numbers to present to you for the budget itself.
Great.
And that is all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Bendig. We need to move on to our work session. So if there are any other questions, they can come up during the finance portion of our work session. So this concludes our finance committee meeting. The finance committee meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Washburn Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for world-class education. The board work session of January 10th, 2022 is now called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May we please have a roll call?
Mrs. Burlingham.
Here.
Mrs. Farrell.
Here.
Mrs. Hetherington.
Here.
Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Mattson.
Here.
Mr. Morvay.
Here.
Mrs. Pound.
Here.
Dr. Pushcheck.
Here.
Mr. Blazer.
Here. Thank you. The chair recognizes Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Ken Berlin, for school reports. Do we have school reports next week, Mr. Berlin?
Yes, we'll highlight a school activity or program next week.
Great, thank you. The next item on our agenda is guests and citizens' comments. We have one person on the agenda registered to speak. Mrs. Jefferson, are you here?
Yes.
Ms. Jefferson, please come forward. Once you're prepared, you'll have 5 minutes to address the board. Prior to your comments, just please state your name and the municipality in which you reside. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Jefferson. I have 3 children in the Wattsburg school system. Ainsley's in 1st grade, Olivia's in 9th grade, and Owen graduated in 2020. He's now the middle school wrestling coach. I coached the current 9th grade girls basketball team from 5th grade to 8th grade. I'm a data and analytics manager at Erie Insurance, and I've lived in the school district most of my life. I want to start out by saying that I respect others' choices during this time of uncertainty, and I truly believe that we're all trying to do what is best for our children. What I believe is best for my child may not be what's best for another family. We all have different beliefs. We're all in different situations, and a diverse perspective is important in these discussions. At such a time of uncertainty, we do not have concrete evidence that one strategy works over another. The policies inflicted on our children should be based on data and facts. There's a lot of conflicting information being spread, including information from the CDC and Pennsylvania Department of Health. In addition, these protocols often change. Their protocols conflict with each other. And a couple months ago, it seemed if you got vaccinated, you wouldn't get COVID. Now they're getting COVID. We weren't supposed to wear masks. Now we're supposed to wear masks. So it's conflicting information, conflicting protocols. The protocols have been in place now for almost 2 years, and still the COVID numbers are at record highs. We're pushing experimental vaccines that have not been proven, and we're making them wear masks for 8 hours a day. Both are not worth the risk to my child. It's not worth the risk putting them through that when they are not impacted by COVID. I consider a vaccine or any medical procedure to be experimental if it's less than a year old. I received a call from the school telling me that my healthy child was not allowed to go to school because they were contact traced. My daughter was naturally immune and contact traced at 91 days. The protocol was that you needed 90 days from the test date to be allowed in school. In addition, if she was vaccinated, she would be allowed in school. We need to start producing the data that you're using to back these protocols up. We're discriminating against those that do not have the vaccine. We need to use those local school data to substantiate the claims before they are protocols. We need to ask questions like, of those contact traced, what percentage ended up getting COVID? We have a lot of kids out of school. I'd like to know how many of them actually end up getting COVID. And then I'd like to differentiate between those that were vaccinated and contact traced and those that were not. And another category could be naturally immune. I strongly feel that someone should not be able to tell me that my healthy child cannot attend school. I'm trying to raise successful and happy children. There are long-term effects from these protocols that are hurting our children, and we need to think about them. We need to teach work ethic and socialization. These are core principles that I teach my children, and your protocols are negatively impacting my beliefs in the way that I want to raise my children. We cannot create a generation that believes they need to quarantine for 2 weeks every time they get a cold, flu, or allergy symptom. They will be our essential workers someday. We're hurting our children by not letting them become naturally immune to the virus. My daughter was crushed not to be able to go to school and basketball. We should not be made to have that conversation with our child where I'm arguing that she cannot go to school. I think about how if this was Owen being contact traced when he was about to go to States. It's things like that that could end a child's life. Depression, suicide, and weight gains are negative long-term impacts on a child's life. I can't let this happen to kids like Ryan Miller in a few months if he makes it to States for wrestling and becomes contact trace. This does not impact them any more than the cold or flu, and we should not be putting the weight on them. Adults have options to take care of themselves, and there are situations that discussions can be had and exceptions can be made. In addition, we need to think the same way about the masks, because in my opinion, the risk of the bacteria on those masks being inhaled and living in that moist, hot location on their face with all the bacteria that comes from their mouth is not good for my child. This will start causing pneumonia. It keeps them from learning. Ainsley is trying to learn to read and can't see the teacher's mouth. Olivia is trying to learn Spanish and can't see the teacher speaking to her. This isn't the world that I want my children to live in,
Ms. Jefferson,
and they do not have to be impacted by it.
thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Has anyone else signed up to speak tonight?
Sorry, I came in late. I thought it was in the cafeteria. I didn't sign up.
Are we not able to accept a sign up? If you don't mind signing up and then coming up, I think it's right over there on the corner table as you walk in, and then you can approach.
Sorry.
Please come forward. So just to clarify, Ms. Jefferson signed up prior, and so she had 5 minutes signing up at the meeting.
I probably need 30.
So just state your name and your municipality, and then your comments for the board.
My name is Stephanie Gredler. I live in Green Township, right? Bonego? I don't know. We just moved here a year ago, so I'm still learning it. So I just drew through a blizzard. It's really bad out, so everybody needs to be careful. I want to note that I do work for emergency care, so I know that COVID is real and alive, and it's nothing to joke about. I do see it on a daily basis. With that being said, I do think these are pointless. I see people wearing cotton. As we see, the CDC just put out that if you are not in a N95, which I have to wear for work, it's kind of pointless. These fray and they're gross. Like I said, N95s is what I have to wear, whether I have a COVID patient or not. People at my work are vaccinated and they're all sick. So my child is 5, and like she said, he's starting to try to read. He has a speech impediment, so he's delayed. He complains about this every day. He's hot, he's sweaty. He comes home and there's food on them, and they're just really gross. They're not form-fitted, so they're kind of pointless to begin with anyway. With me, like even this, I can put my finger in here, you can breathe through them. When we first started, the open house was wear your mask, social distance, so we won't have to close. What happened a month ago? We closed, right? Kind of don't see the point of wearing a mask if we're going to close anyway. And that puts total strain on the kids. It's terrible. In my profession, I haven't seen kids getting sick. I see adults, older generation, the ones who have pre-conditions. Kids aren't getting it as often, or nearly severe. And as Fauci had said, that there's a difference between kids in the hospital with COVID and for COVID. And what he's seeing is kids with COVID. Not necessarily they're in there because of COVID. It's just they had appendicitis and they had to have surgery. Well, then they got tested and they're positive for COVID. So that adds to the case. So I'm not really sure where you guys are weighing with the whole mask thing. I don't know how teachers feel about it, but I know how kids feel about it. I deal with kids and my kid, and it's really hard on them. And I really want my younger child to go to preschool next year, and that's not going to happen if we have to wear masks because he's 3 and won't do it. He wears it for about 30 seconds at the doctor's office. The doctors who I've talked to agree with me. Masks are pointless, especially for kids. It's not working for their learning. It's hurting them. Like I said, they can take it off for eating. They can take it off when they're outside playing. Adults don't have to wear them when you're out. I don't know if you guys wear them out in public, but you don't have to. So I'm kind of confused why kids need to wear it in school. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate it. Moving on, the chair recognizes Mr. Ken Berlith for a superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glazer. Do you just have that PDF form, Mrs. Kelly? Yeah, you're muted.
Is that okay, or do you want me to find the PowerPoint?
No, we can just work from this. So as our guest speakers had alluded to, we are talking this month about the mask mandate because that has come back to a decision that's in local school board hands, as if you've been following the newspapers and the media. And it truly is a community decision, and you're the elected directors here to make those types of decisions for our school and students. I think my role at this point is just to give you the facts, as the latest facts as I understand them, and have been posted publicly to the CDC and Department of Health websites and other sources. So you can see right now that the country is in a high transmission rate by both of those metrics, cases in the past 7 days per 100,000 and percent positivity. And that is the highest it's been during the entire pandemic. So let's go to the next slide, Mrs. Kelly. So then I just wanted to draw the focus down into Erie County. Even with my bifocals, I can't see that. So you can see percent positivity is 36%. Again, that's the highest it's been in Erie County, and the rate per 100,000 is 1,309 cases. The good news is that in all of Erie County, they consider 60% of the population vaccinated. But I have some data to show you in a minute that it's inconsistent across the county. So I'll try to drill down into our area so you can make the best decision. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this just came off of the CDC website. This is for Erie County, Pennsylvania. This was their January 8th update. They update this at least once a week. And if you saw the paper today, I think there were 609 cases. We're now averaging 600 plus cases per day in Erie County, and that is you can see the effect of the Omicron variant. I mean, it's basically a straight line up. So we're going up like a rocket. For some perspective, this hump here, that was 2 Christmases ago. Remember, we had to go virtual for a couple weeks before Christmas, and then we had to go virtual a few days, 8 days there around the Thanksgiving holiday because we reached that same peak. And I can talk about this more. The guidance for closing schools has become guidance. It was a hard and fast stop from the Department of Health and the Department of Education at the beginning of the year. They said, hey, if you hit 5%, that's it. You need to close for a few days. So they've backed off of that. So we do have the luxury now of examining as much data as we can gather to make a decision that's best for Wattsburg, not necessarily Erie County. All right, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a summary of when we've been out. So you can see up at the top is last May and June, we finished the year in person. In fact, last year, with the exception of the beginning of the year, where we were overly cautious with having the high school kids home, and we had split the K-6 among the 3 buildings. And at the time, of course, we didn't know as much as we know now, but the reasoning was for that was what was mentioned tonight with regards to reading. We were prioritizing those K through 3 students, because if you miss that window of opportunity, that's when their minds are ready to learn how to read. If you miss that, it becomes exceedingly difficult past 3rd grade. So that was some of what went into that decision. We realized after about 5.5 weeks that the sky wasn't falling, and we brought the high school students back in successfully. Then we only had a couple short closures. And this year we've been in person, except for that 8-day closure around Thanksgiving holiday, and we're still in person today. But here's the issue, like the 60% vaccination rate in Erie County, our students are the lowest percent of that. So all the school-age students is what we're concerned with, and we know that a lot of them are not vaccinated. Now, the good news is we've held 4 clinics here, and a lot more students have gotten vaccinated, so we know that's coming up for those people that feel comfortable with that decision. All right, let's go to the next slide. The Erie County Health Department data stream has kind of crumbled here in the past month, and I think it's because of the political transition with the new county executive, because the health department, the head of the health department, Melissa Lyons, she left because she knew that the new executive was coming on board and was going to appoint a new health director anyways. So they've been really unstable, and you can see, like this was last updated the middle of December. So it's probably a little bit better now, but you can see that at that time, that red circle is the primary zip codes of the district. We were ranging in that 30 to 49% vaccination rate. And of course, as per the previous slide, which was current as of today, a lot of those are not students. Now let's go to the next slide. So I updated this before the meeting this afternoon, and to give you some perspective, the top box there, that's positive and probable, and we're supposed to look, as per the guidance, at a 14-day period backwards. So to give you some perspective, last Monday there was about 7 positive cases in the district among the students. Today it's 64. But that is a little deceiving because the quarantine, as you know, the CDC lowered that from 10 to 5 days. So the number of students we have out is a lot less than you would normally expect under the 10-day rule. So students are getting back to us quicker. So that's a positive thing. A lot of people don't understand the hierarchy of how the rules roll down from the CDC. The CDC is not, they have very little authority to enforce their guidance, their recommendations. So that comes out, and then the state departments of health, they look at that, and they make decisions on what they want to adopt and push down to the county departments of health, and then the county departments of health issue guidance or guidelines that can be enforced by the Erie County Health Department in conjunction with the Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement. People don't understand, in a pandemic, school districts become an extension, so to speak, as per the public law of 1955 regarding communicable diseases. So in that situation, we're required to notify people that you have to quarantine, and we have to notify them as per the guidelines that come from the health department. So we share some of the concerns that were mentioned tonight. We don't have control over those quarantine lengths of time. So that's something that we just have to deal with. That's a fact that's there. And it has to play into decision making. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And finally, and this is hyperlinked on the agenda if you want to see where all this data comes from. Everything that's in blue underlined, you can click there It's mostly from the CDC and some from the Department of Health. But this is simply saying that if we had 50 people at an event like tonight, if there was 50 people in here, there's a 97% probability that one person is going to be positive. So that just kind of plays into our decision making with regards to activities and do we need to look at that or not? So far, we're open for business fully. So this is just some information to help the board in our discussion tonight on the health and safety plan. Another immutable rule that we're dealing with does deal with masks. And regardless of whether you think a mask is effective or a mask is ineffective, the CDC and the health department says with masks, the quarantine radius is 3 feet. Without a mask, it goes to 6 feet. So as a practical matter, if we don't have a mask mandate, quarantines are going to double, granted for a shorter period of time. And I don't like masks any more than anyone else does, but I hate remote instruction even more. So that's just my perspective, and you can take it how you will, and just kind of tuck that into the overall decision-making process. And that's all I have, Mr. Blazer.
Thank you, Mr. Berlin. Are there any questions from the board for Mr. Berlin regarding his report?
So.
Mrs. Hetherington?
Sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
We're doing a lot of pushing of vaccines, but we've seen that they're not that effective with this variant of COVID. So, I mean, what's the difference if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated? It only shortens their quarantine.
Yeah. I'm not a medical expert, but all the policies, they do favor vaccinated people. Not the Wattsburg Area School District policies, the CDC guidance adopted by the Pennsylvania Department of Health, propagated down to the Erie County Health Department, and then that's what we're dealing with. So
it seems unfair that we're propagating. I know that there's only so much we can do. We're propagating bad policy.
Well,
they make bad policy, we have to follow it.
That's the structure right now. Yes, we don't have control of that.
Mr. President, I have another question. I did have a couple questions about the testing and what that would do to the students that are quarantined. Could we talk about that now, or do you want to talk about that under the?
Let's talk about it under the health and safety plan, so we can put up on the screen and kind of see.
Perfect.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board for Mr. Berlin? Thank you. The chair recognizes Mrs. Vicki Bendig, the business administrator, for her report. Mrs. Bendig.
Thank you, Mr. President. For tonight, I have the Treasury Reports and the bill lists. Treasurer's Report in the general fund for December 31st, 2021, a balance of $12,167,005.06. In the Capital Projects Fund, there was $34.32 as of December 31st, and the cafeteria account has $412,062.36 as of December 31st. Moving on to the rest of the reports, the year-to-date budget to actual and the cafeteria profit and loss reports will be available for next week's meeting. The bill lists, Exhibit A1, those are checks already written. Checks written since our December 6th board meeting, totaling $725,061.96. That is higher than usual, but it has been 5 weeks since our last bill, and we've been continuing to pay bills in the process. Exhibit B1, cafeteria checks already written, $22,350.74. And Capital Project Fund, Exhibit C1, checks written on that account, $42,857.25. The Seneca High School Activity Fund currently has, as of December 31st, 2021, the balance in that account was $79,419.96. I'll have more bill lists to present next week, but that is all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Bendig. Any questions from the board for Mrs. Bendig regarding her report?
Mr. President, I have one question.
Mr. Morley.
Ms. Bendig, under Exhibit A1, guess it'd be check details by date. What is Peterman Limited? Can you help me out on that?
That is our bus contractor.
Oh, okay. I thought that was, okay.
It's
Fair enough.
Durham School
Yes.
Services,
Right.
and their parent company is
It's Peterman.
Peterman LLC.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Thank you. That's why I didn't recognize the name. Thank you. Correct.
Hearing no other items, those items will be, hearing no other questions, those items will be on your agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Bendig. We have 2 items on the agenda under legal advisement for next week. I'll take them one at a time. LA1 is our ARP ESSER Health and Safety Plan update that we had just mentioned. Mr. Berlin, do you want to talk to us a little bit more?
Sure,
about that?
thanks, Mr. Blazer. You want to scroll to page 2, Mrs. Kelly? All right, so if you were in our finance committee meeting or caught the end of it, you know that the federal government has given us about $2.7 million for all things related to COVID mitigation. You know, we've bought water fountains, masks, hand sanitizer. We've put artificial intelligence temperature cameras throughout the building. Yeah, we had summer school last year. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've been spending that on. As a condition of receiving that money and expending that money, we're required to have a health and safety plan that's updated every 6 months. So we last approved this in August, right before school started, so we're in January, so we're coming into that 6-month window. So there's really only one recommended change to the plan. PDE came out right before the holiday with a program called Test to Stay, and it's a completely optional program that parents can opt their child into. Wherein if a student is exposed and they're not fully vaccinated, if the parent consents, we'll have rapid tests here, and they can be tested between days 2 and 4 and 5 and 7, and keep coming to the school. Like now, unlike now where they'd have to quarantine for 5 days. So this is the Department of Health guidelines for that, and of course it's hyperlinked. And we're still learning exactly what this is going to entail logistically. So if the board does approve this as an addition to the health and safety plan, we'll continue to figure out the logistics with the Department of Health and Ginkgo and Concentric. That's the company that the Pennsylvania Department of Health has partnered with to supply us with tests if we choose to go down this road. So let's go to the next page, Mrs. Kelly. So our mask policy reads just as it did in August when this was approved. So in low and moderate, masks are strongly recommended. In substantial or high, the board will consider a mandate examining all available data. And if it's in between board meetings, say there's a massive spike, I would be able to temporarily say, let's wear masks until the board gets together to reevaluate. So that stays. The only other updates to this document, all the hyperlinks have been updated to reflect the current CDC reduced quarantine guidelines and so on. So let's back out of that, Mrs. Kelly. Get back to the agenda. So that's why there's LA2 for the board to consider, mask mandate resolution. Resolved that the Wattsburg School District would continue universal masking requirement currently in place for students, staff, and visitors while inside school buildings and riding on school buses as per the safety plan. So these things kind of go together. If you approve the safety plan, then you consider the next consideration is to continue masking or not, because we're in high we're in high transmission right now. So I'll just pause there. Is there any questions from the board? Yes, Mrs. Hetherington.
So
To participate in the test to stay program, we have to be a universal mask, right?
No.
We have to have a mask mandate?
No, that just changed.
Okay.
The Department of Ed notified us last week that you no longer have to have universal masking to participate in test to stay. But the other impact, like I had said before, is quarantining goes to 6 feet radius. So,
I have a question.
yes, Mrs. Powell.
How difficult is it for us to follow the 6-foot guideline in all of the buildings?
It's not possible. We can get close. Last year, the guideline was 6 feet or to the extent possible. So we can get 6 feet, a lot like these gathering areas in the middle and the elementary here. We've been able to spread students out, especially at lunch, to get that 6 feet. But in the classrooms, 6 feet, some rooms yes, some rooms no. At the high school, mostly no. So that's where the 3-foot rule has been helpful in reducing quarantines.
Mrs. Fair?
I have two. One, does the TTS, does that qualify for teachers as well?
Yes. Students and staff that are unvaccinated or partially vaccinated.
Okay, and then my second question is, so if you have a group of students who were contacted today that they needed to quarantine, if their adult contact approved, they could be tested today and stay in school, or they still have to come home for a set amount of time?
No, they would stay in school and test between 2 and 4 days, and then 5 and 7.
Okay.
And that second test, like after 7 days, if you're negative a second time, you're no longer considered a close contact. It kind of exits you from that classification.
May I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
So, and if you don't, I realize this is all new and changing kind of at the moment. So, if we went the no mask way and they were tested and negative, obviously they can stay in school, are they then required to wear a mask during their still kind of quarantine period?
Yes.
Okay.
Required only because we require it.
Well, if you want to utilize test to stay,
Then
that's one of the conditions for that person to stay as per the Department of Health.
I see. Okay.
Mrs.
That
Hetherington?
first.
Can you explain that again?
Mrs. Hetherington, go ahead.
Can you explain that again? So if they are exposed, they must mask.
Yes.
Just those kids that are exposed, until they get their 2 negative tests.
Well, actually, for 7 days.
That's all there's to there.
So they have 2 negative tests within that 7-day period, and then on day 8, no mask. And they wouldn't miss any school.
And we're getting the tests from the state.
That,
We don't have to buy them.
we don't buy them. So we've been trying to learn more about this. This is the information that's out there. I've spent a lot of time on the phone with Concentric. There is a lot to the process because we have to order a certain amount of tests every week that we anticipate using. They send us bar scanners, and then we have to scan every test, positive or negative, into their database, because that's obviously part of why they're in the game. They're a data collection. That's part of their science, part of what they do research-wise. So if you vote, yeah, let's go with test to stay, is that going to happen next Tuesday after the board meeting? No, it's probably going to be another 2 to 3 weeks before we get that up and rolling.
Mrs. Burlingame?
I had a quick question too. So you had stated earlier that parents enroll for this program. So if they enroll in it, they have an option, like if their child is exposed, they can choose to do the test to stay, or they can choose not to have them do that, and then they would just be mandated to quarantine their regular amount of days.
Right.
Okay.
So it would essentially be a waiver or a permission form for parents to sign.
Okay.
So we know who's in and who's out.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because that if we are choosing to bring it on or not, parents are not going to be mandated to do this if they choose not to.
Correct.
Like the test.
Earlier, they were pushing pooled testing where they wanted every student tested. And, you know, we had talked about that briefly and didn't think we'd get the level of participation to even make that data useful. You know, you might only get a handful of people that say, yeah, swab my kindergartner 2 times a week for the next 180 days. You know, the participation rate would be low.
I have another question. Is it possible to maximize the social distancing within the school? Say we vote no masks. Can we maximize the amount of space between kids in all the classrooms and areas that are possible to minimize the spread of the virus? Is that a possible thing to do if we say no?
Well, that's what we did last year. We had spread things out in the classroom. We found out, though, that the high school is really tight. In the middle school and elementary school rooms, depending on class size, sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. We have been able to get to 3 feet, though, consistently.
So
Our major exposure areas, which is related to your question, bus and cafeteria.
But that's because, sorry,
No, you're fine.
but that's because masks are on any other locations right now per the quarantine
Right.
guidelines, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Mrs. Hetherington?
What's the option, is there any other option, like we either do this, PTS, or we don't do it? Is that their option?
Right now, I mean, it could change tomorrow,
Right.
but right now, this is what the Department of Health has issued for
And
us.
if we decide to opt out, like all of us, we just continue with what we're doing, like the regular CDC guidelines?
Correct. I think I'm understanding your question.
Well, you said it's an optional thing that we can say yes or no to.
Right.
But we could, as a district, say, no, we don't do it. I mean, I'm sure it's.
Yeah, you could say,
Not gonna wanna do it.
right,
but-
you could say no altogether, or if the board says, yes, we approve this, then individuals have the choice not to participate, if and, and when we get it up and running. See, and that's the other part of the equation. There's a nationwide shortage of tests right now, so I don't know what their ability to supply us with tests would be like. I mean, you can see, like, in the 14-day look back, there was 155 or 57 exposures, so that's 157 tests, times 2, right?
Mrs. Bowden, did you have another question?
I did, but it left my brain. So
No,
go ahead,
Mr.
Steve.
Morvay?
Other districts in other counties, they opted to eliminate the mask mandate. Crawford County schools in early December, from what I recall. I think Warren schools may have had that option as well because Erie County Department of Health kept the mandate in until the beginning of the year. Given our COVID dashboard, do those other districts, is there any data that they can share on, basically they've had basically a month, granted with Christmas break, et cetera. If there's any data that showed increases or decrease, or they stayed the same of either case counts or quarantines or any of that, I don't know if there's any data out there that helps guide other districts with real world experience, given that they've eliminated the mask mandate.
Right.
I don't know if there is.
I mean, I can reach out to them. It would be something that they locally are launching.
Yeah, I mean, if they do something like this COVID dashboard as well, it'd be nice anecdotal information to see what really happened when they took the masks away. I don't know.
I'll reach out to those
If that's possible.
folks and see what I can gather.
Okay.
And I'll
Thank you.
send that out in the weekly update so you have a little bit of time to.
I think that'd be helpful to know.
I remember when
Go ahead, Ms. Bowden.
So if we decide to say no to masking, and this goes to like parents and students, what guidelines or onus do we put on us as parents or the students and the teachers to help us control the positive rating? I mean, nobody wants to wear a mask, so how can we all work together as one team to figure out how best to not have to wear a mask?
I think
Well,
that's,
they're still required on buses, correct? No matter what we do.
No matter what we do, it's required on buses. And that's a federal regulation right now.
And just to clarify, in the updated health and safety plan, what I'm hearing some members say is if you're saying if we don't allow masks, almost like you say, no, I don't wear a mask. But no, it would be recommended still, CDC still recommends it. would not be saying that even though we're in the substantial level, we're not mandating.
Right,
That-
right,
That's
right.
what you're saying,
That's what I'm
correct?
saying,
Okay,
yes, we
right.
don't mandate it.
Correct, okay. The question I had, Mr. Berlin, was, so the 14-day look-back data that you showed was 144 students and then another 11 staff, and that's always sort of the conundrum, is as much as we want to relax some rules for students, staff being out almost impacts us more because we have to shut down once we don't have enough workers. But on top of that, this 14-day look-back goes to 12/27. We weren't in school until the 3rd or 4th, so these numbers look astronomical when you think they're not really even a full 14 days, or are we getting reports
So,
over the holiday?
yeah, that's a very, very good observation, Mr. Blazer. We had a team meeting, a COVID team meeting today, and we sorted all the data to see how many positive cases were back to that 27th, and there was none. That was strictly from like 1-3 on.
So it's like a 10-day look back, it's really, or somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because we we weren't getting, obviously, a flood of data, people just calling us on Christmas.
And as you've reported in all of your reports, over the last 2 years about COVID, unfortunately, you've been doing a COVID report that long, we mimic whatever Erie County's doing. We have a smaller blip on the overall scale, but we mimic. Erie County is straight up, like you said, skyrocketing.
Yeah.
So even by next week, we could be talking about very different data, both locally as well as Erie County.
What's unfortunate with this transition with the Erie County government is, you may remember there was a slide that I always showed that had the number of cases within our district border, not just zip codes, but our actually drawn district border, with the 4 municipalities in the borough. Well, the health department stopped sending that to us at the end of October when they started falling apart. People started jumping ship. So we don't have access right now to good local data. Now the CDC does drill it down to zip codes, but our zip codes extend to Harbor Creek, Mill Creek, into Erie, Northeast, Union City, Corey. So that data it could be of some value, but it's not going to be really reflective of our population.
And the other thing to take into consideration is the amount of hospitalizations versus people who are just, positive with flu-like symptoms and not in a critical situation.
Sure. Are there any other questions or discussion on the 2 items under legal advice in LA1, LA2? Did you have something, Mrs. Bendix?
I have a question. So, the TTF, the test to stay, as a parent, will all parents have to sign a waiver? Say you vote to do it. Do you sign now to say, yes, I want to do it, or no, I don't? Or is it once my student has been contact traced, I then make the decision whether I want a test to stay or not?
Well, the initial training materials we've been going through, it looks like the most efficient thing would be to tell parents, here's a program, if you want to participate, sign this participation.
So it would be a blanket thing, everybody does it now, deciding whether or not they want to participate or not?
Yeah, logistically, that would probably be the best way to do it. I mean, we could do it the other way, but it would just slow things down.
Sure. I just wanted.
Sure. Any questions? Dr. Bushek?
Thank you. I appreciate the public's comments tonight, and I also appreciate the comment that we have diverse perspectives, which we do, and there's no easy answers. We are charged as 9 members to make decisions for our community, and we try to make those decisions based upon data. Some people don't agree with data, some people don't believe in the data, or they have their own data that they like to present. So our job is to try to decipher through this, sift through this, and make a decision based upon data. And I see no data to indicate that we need to change course. Whether you agree with masks or not, it's a mitigation effort. Whether you agree with vaccines or not, it's a mitigation effort. For us to change course at this point, where we have cases higher than we've ever had in the pandemic, we're not at the peak yet. I think we need, as a board, to consider staying the course, continue to do a month-by-month evaluation, but to say we're just going to drop masks because we don't like them or because certain people don't believe in them, I think would be doing a disservice for the district as a whole, for the community as a whole. And I know that people will disagree with that, and they do that, and I respect their decision to do that. But as a board, it's going to make a decision for 1,200 students and an exponential number of family members to change course now. Why? What data are we going to base our decision to change course? Nobody likes masks. Nobody does. Everybody wants in-person learning. The current mitigation efforts we have is our best bet to continue to keep students in school, to continue the efforts not to have massive amounts of students quarantined, and to continue not to have our schools shut down. I think the students want to be here. I think we want to be here. Masks are an inconvenience, but if it keeps us in school, I see no data whatsoever to change course right now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mrs. Henry, did you have a question or?
I have a comment. I disagree. I think our mitigation efforts have not been working, so why not try something different? Because we have not changed course. We have not gotten better. Things have not changed. They've just gotten worse. So let's try something different. We're not saying you can't wear masks. We're saying you don't have to.
Thank you. Those two items will be on our agenda next week for our consideration. The chair recognizes Mr. Stephen Morvay for finance. Mr. Morvay.
Mr. President, we'll be bringing 5 items under finance to the board's consideration next week. One is F1 transfers, as noted, monthly budgetary transfer from the budget to the actual as outlined, as well as from unassigned fund balance to capital project as outlined for the heat pump project for the Wattsburg Area Elementary School, as well as from committed fund balance to capital projects for the balance of the clocks and the intercom work, as well as restroom work in the elementary center, paving and carpeting. So we'll be bringing F1 transfers to the board next week. As well as we will be bringing item F2, budgetary amendment, as to approve the budgetary amendment as outlined. That is one of the attachments that is part of the agenda. We will bring that towards the board next week, as well as F3, preliminary general fund budget for the 22-23 school year, to approve the accelerated budget opt-out resolution that was discussed earlier regarding the tax rate within the index, as was presented earlier during our work session, as well as the item number F4, the IRS mileage rate, to approve the IRS mileage rate of 58.5 cents a mile for business and travel effective beginning January 1st. And additionally, F5, the local audit report that we heard as well during our committee meeting, to approve the local audit report as presented to us earlier this evening. Those will be the 5 items that we'll be bringing to the board, Mr. President, under finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on the items under finance?
Mr. President,
Dr. Pusha?
I just want to draw attention once again to F5, the local audit report, that we had a presentation during our finance committee meeting of a clean and unmodified audit, which is the highest rating you can get for an audit, and that is attributed to the stewardship of our administration and the business office, and I continue to commend them for continuing to have clean and unmodified audits. So the public needs to know we are in good hands financially, and we are good stewards of the public dollar, and everything was done according to the general accepted accounting principles. So thank you to Superintendent Berlin, Business Administrator Mrs. Bendig, and their respective teams.
Thank you, and I concur. I wholeheartedly agree, and I remember as they went through the audit report, their conversations and discussions about the payroll issues that they recommended, and hearing that we've implemented all those, and really are going above and beyond in monitoring that. It's really great to hear and see, and I know it's a lot of work, so appreciate it.
I do have a question on that one.
Mrs. Pep?
Vicki, you mentioned that we put into place the checkpoints where we're looking at 5 of the employees' data points. Have we come across any discrepancies on those? Okay. I didn't think so, but I was.
And he said monthly, but she actually checks it every payroll. She
Okay.
checks 5 different employees every payroll.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lee?
I just have one question. Did the Erie County Tech School have all the business managers agreed upon a rate for the savings program? Is that going to be initiated this year?
The capital rates,
The capital.
that's on hold for the time being. The renovation right now has taken up most of the time of the administration at the tech school. Mr. Emmerich, the superintendent of record, he wants to put that on hold for a couple months until construction's underway and they can take a look at that in a more comprehensive way.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions or discussions? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Mr. Sean Matson for Buildings and Grounds. Mr. Matson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one item under Buildings and Grounds this week, B1. This will be for approval for next week's meeting. Utilization of school facilities to approve the following requests for use of facilities. The Wrestling Club, the Wattsburg Wrestling Club for a wrestling tournament on Sunday, February 6, 2022, and an hour on Saturday for setup at an estimated cost of $426.44. And the Wrestling Club, Wattsburg Wrestling Club for the wrestling tournament on Sunday, January 23rd, 2022, at the estimated cost of $342.44. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussions on the items under Buildings and Grounds? Mrs. Powell?
Well, I know that we've always charged the clubs, but is there a reason why we continue to need to charge the clubs? Because there are kids coming up from, the little kids that are gonna be our future athletes. I don't know if that's a consideration to talk about it at a later date, but.
We just reviewed the building and grounds policy, and that's what it says. So really, and Mrs. Bendiger could probably do a breakdown of these fees, but they're not being charged a fee to use the facility, only for custodians that are not on duty on a Sunday. And of course we have to pay them time and a half too. So Saturday is a complete free day for those kids. No fees, no custodial charge, because we already have custodians on Saturday.
Are there any activities that these clubs can do themselves, so we don't have to have anybody here to clean up or do whatever the custodians are doing?
I wouldn't recommend that. It's always good to have a set of district employees here to keep an eye on things. If things start to go south, they can contact Eric immediately and get the assistance. We have, I don't even know the value of these facilities, but they're enormous and they're very nice. And I think this has always been a good compromise, is to try to give as much free away as we can until we get into a Sunday issue where we're dealing with bringing in people that aren't working and paying them time and a half overtime.
Plus you have liability for people.
Correct.
From us. Yeah.
This is Henry.
If they did it on Saturday, then the fee would be free.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Do they know that if they did it on Saturday, they would be?
We've had discussions with them.
Well, if they're willing to pay it, then
You know,
that's their problem, I guess.
And it's possible that the gym is not available on a Saturday because we have our own athletic events going on.
Are there any other questions? Building and Grounds? Hearing none, those will be on the agenda for your consideration next week. Thank you, Mr. Matson.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mrs. Nicole Lee for Personnel. Mrs. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll have 4 items for the agenda next week. P1 is Kelly substitute additions to approve any additions as outlined. P2, tuition reimbursement as outlined. P3, leave request to approve intermittent family leave for Crystal Fennell. And P4, any of the conference requests as listed.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion on items under Personnel? Hearing none, those will be on the agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Lee. The chair recognizes Ms. Amanda Farrell for Policy. Mrs. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not have any items.
Thank you, Mrs. Farrell. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushak for Curriculum. Dr. Pushak.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 items under curriculum next week for the board's consideration. C1, approval of academic services, and C2, approval of the school calendar.
Are there any questions or discussions under the items of curriculum? Hearing none, those items will be on the agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Dr. Pushak.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mrs. Leah Hetherington for Technology. Mrs. Hetherington.
Thank you, Mr. Blazer. I have nothing for technology today.
Thank you, Mrs. Hetherington. The chair recognizes Mrs. Brittany Burlingham for Transportation. Mrs. Burlingham.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. President, I have one item under transportation for the agenda for next week. It is T1, the transportation request, to approve the transportation request and ratification of field trips since last meeting as outlined. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the items under transportation? Hearing none, those items will be on your agenda next week. Thank you, Mrs. Burlingame. The chair recognizes Mrs. Tara Pound for athletic and extracurricular.
Thank you. I have 5 items for next week. AE1 is the volunteer list. AE2 is the athletic resignations. AE3, extracurricular resignation. AE4, extracurricular appointment. And AE5, the game help list, all for next week.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion on items under athletic and extracurricular? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Pound. There's nothing under miscellaneous for next week's agenda. For the Erie County Technical School Report, Mr. Morgan.
Mr. President, the next meeting is scheduled for about 2 weeks, so I won't be able to have a report for this upcoming board meeting. But then the following meeting in February, I'll be able to report what occurred in January.
Great, thank you very much.
And Mr. Blazer, I did attend the last meeting before his date became effective, so I can give a brief update next week on the last meeting I attended.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Lee. For the Northwest Intermediate Unit report, Dr. Pushak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Similar to the VOTEC, we had no December meeting, and our next meeting is January 26th.
Great, thank you very much. That brings us to board correspondence and dialogue. Anything from the board this evening? Mrs. Pound?
Mr. Berlin, I think I emailed you on the survey results for Stepworski. Are we going to go over those at some point?
Yeah, so I contacted him and asked him if he said he'd be willing to come. He hasn't finalized his report yet,
Oh.
so he wants to do that, and then he said he's happy to come to a meeting and talk about the results.
Okay. And then what are we doing with those survey results because we sent out another survey, didn't we, about the internet or?
Was his.
No, I thought there was more than one. I remember doing his, it was the long one, and then
Yeah.
didn't we do another survey after that on the internet?
Not at the beginning of school year.
Not that I can remember.
Wasn't that at the beginning of school?
Was that for equipment needed?
Yeah, it might have been there. We did a survey for who needed hotspots, I
Oh,
think.
yeah.
That's what it was.
Okay. All right, thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, any other board discussion? We would like to thank all the students for attending. Great to see your faces behind the masks. And we also thank the public. We do value your input. We don't all agree on everything, but it is good to hear the different perspectives. So thanks for coming out, giving up your evenings, even in the bad weather, and sharing those with us. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mashak.
Second, Pound.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.